What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk to you about SoundHound. I want to go over some expectations for this upcoming week, what might cause some volatility in the stock price, and go over everything else you need to know. But first, make sure to hit that thumbs up, and with that, let's get right to it. So starting off, SoundHound did put out their earnings tail end of last week. And mind you, it was pretty much one of the worst weeks in 2025. Did cause the stock price to go down 18.1%. In my opinion, I feel like this is no fault to SoundHound whatsoever. It was just kind of piggybacking off of the broader market's negativity. SoundHound earnings, though, was pretty solid. I see some people online kind of crapping on them. And you know me, I always like to play devil's advocate. So if there's negatives, I definitely will bring it up. But I actually really liked their earnings. And so I listened through it, read through the transcript a couple times as well to obviously prepare for this video. But they did come in line for the earnings per share. Revenue, they did beat. They did use, I believe the exact phrase was going to be leaving 2025 profitable. So tail end of the earnings, so Q4, they'll be profitable. That's what I care about. That's what institutions care about. And that in among itself should also be a natural deterrent against shorts. So I think overall their earnings was pretty solid. They did raise their guidance. It wasn't anything crazy. It was like 2 million, but still nonetheless pretty good stuff. I think that could cause a nice domino effect going into following quarters. So you've started to already see it as well, more on the revenue side. So I believe even for instance, it was Q1, you did have initially, I think it was like 36 million. So now the forecast is 43.51 million. So we did get a lot of new ratings that did come out, and clearly a lot of them caused a nice domino effect for following quarters. So year-over-year growth, constant, solid double-digit growth, and this is exactly what you want to see for within a company. And for it to be profitable, that's just icing on the cake. These are some of the ratings that did come out. Still, my fave, Daniel Ives, still hasn't given a official rating. I believe he did an article, kind of talked a little bit about SoundHound, but not a official rating through tip ranks. So we did get some bullish ones though. So $26 buy, H.C. Wainwright, Scott, who has a 33% success rating, so not all that great, but you did also have 13, 15, 15. So overall, pretty good stuff. Still some hesitation. I think a lot of that had to do with macro concerns. But the timing worked out perfect because after hours, or kind of power hour on Friday, we got some pretty good updates. When it came down to SoundHound's earnings, there was a couple of things. So once they do submit their actual earnings through SEC, I'll dive deep into that and give you a full overview. But this right here, this little back and forth with Gil, I wanted to mention this. So for those of you that remember, I've been covering SoundHound for a while, and way back in the day when Tesla was kind of talking about Optimus, I mentioned just vaguely and in passing that SoundHound would be perfect for that. Think about it, right? That's kind of what it's all about. And yeah, Gil kind of brought that up about the whole Chinese robotics deal. And is this going to be much more than something like a humanoid robot? So it was answered saying that it's not a human robot, but it does pave the way for the experience that he's imagining. So this is where, if you are investing in SoundHound, the whole dynamic is going to change, and the whole sector is going to continue to change over the next 5 years. That looking back, it's going to be like crazy. So I feel like SoundHound is a little bit more conservative still, but clearly it's working for them and it's like getting them business. I think any company that's too aggressive over this last week would have been completely slaughtered, a lot more than the 18%. So I think SoundHound is doing something right, but I think there's a hell of a lot of things happening behind the scenes that we can only can't even imagine. So I don't know. There's a lot more to it. Like I said, I'll dive deep into this maybe in my other SoundHound video, but starting off with some data points. So we did have a lot of good data last week. So we got some labor link data. So we had ADP, which came in good. We had challenger job cuts, which was negative. And then Michigan consumer sentiment came in positive. On this upcoming week, so we do have ADP employment weekly. We also do have the MBA mortgage. So that should affect a lot of the fintechs out there. That's been a hot topic, of course, consumers lately. A lot of Fed speakers throughout the week. but this is where things might get very exciting. So for instance, on Thursday, this is where we have CPI listed, initial jobless claims. Then on Friday, PPI retail sales. Technically, with the whole shutdown, all of that's been paused, and we haven't had initial jobless claims in like a very long time. It feels like almost years. That's a little bit more exaggerating, but Friday, right before the market did close, we got this, a little bit more of an Easter egg or like a hint. And so it does show right here, U.S. Senate Democrats on Friday scaled back their demands to end the 38-day government shutdown, the longest in history. So ultimately, they're asking for one thing. And so at this stage in the game, I think everyone and their dog believes that like the whole shutdown is going to end. And so essentially that does mean that stocks are going to run up like crazy. We saw SoundHound, many other stocks really starting to gain up some good momentum going on. I even did buy in the after hours on Friday, which is very abnormal for me. This dip right here exactly at 1434 partially was me right there. So I did buy that dip, luckily enough. I placed a kind of limit order, was hoping for the best for it to fill, and luckily it did. So because I do feel over this weekend, at the time of this video, there hasn't been any crazy updates or developments, but I do feel over this weekend, we are going to have the official announcement that the shutdown is concluded. Thus, that does mean that all these data points are going to be out and released. So that is going to cause potentially the market just to go through like a FOMO stage. So there's that. We also do have a lot of big companies unveiling their earnings, which could, again, in among itself, kind of propel the market higher. On a caveat, I want to add a little bit more of an asterisk. If we do not get a update for the whole shutdown, let's say this was just more of a hint, rumor, and nothing amounts to it, then technically no different than Palantir, how they really affected the market and how the market really punished kind of higher multiple stocks. A lot of these stocks on coming up, such as RGTI, CoreWeave, Beyond Meat, all of them have very high multiples. So you might see that same level of fear if we don't have kind of some shutdown update. So just be somewhat prepared for that. SoundHound hasn't put out any news since their earnings. Interestingly enough, there was no interviews from what I can see that was posted online. Social media, they were very ambitious about their earnings, clearly, because they posted it like 3 times back to back, 2 times November the 6th, 1 time on November the 5th. So I think SoundHound was very hyped up, and rightfully so. When it comes down to shorts, they did increase 916,000 shares on Friday. So going into this upcoming week, 29.09% of the free floats being shorted, works out to be 106.5 million shares overall being shorted. So I personally feel like that's crazy high. Most likely, once we do get some level and confirmation of profitability, then we might be going back down to, let's say, that 13% range, short interest. And if you actually think about it, so I'm scrolling back here. So how does that make sense? And this is not just with SoundHound, but a lot of stocks. A lot of stocks have either achieved profitability or something else. But over the years, shorts have just doubled down and tripled down. It doesn't make sense. So SoundHound back in 2023, they were a very risky play. And yet the short interest was only 3.9%. Now that SoundHound is on the verge of profitability, how does that make sense that we're at 29.09? It just doesn't make sense. But anyways, aside from all of that though, from a bull standpoint, you see a consensus for it to be roughly around that 1550, and you see a couple pockets for it to be above 20. I don't know where that's coming from, but 1550 seems to be on the table. Bears are anticipating for it to be more consolidation, for it to be roughly around that $13 range. Did see a lot of big transactions on Friday, so big money was definitely buying the dip. So give yourself a shout out if you were able to buy over the last 48 hours, give or take. Because yeah, there were some pretty good deals. Aside from all that though, right now with it at 1414, That's where it did close at. It is trading between this S2 and this S3. So 1450 is going to be that key kind of pivot to watch for early on, and then 1603 and then 1850. So I think as far as this upcoming week, even though SoundHound had good earnings, it's achieving good growth, it is going to come down to Shutdown. Like if that comes to fruition or not, that's going to be the make it or break it for the broader market, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but even on, for instance, last Thursday and Friday, SoundHound's technicals did break. And so as of technically Friday, it did close below that 100-day moving average. And generally, even that 50-day moving average, the blue line right there, that one's a big deal for growth stocks. So as of November the 4th, that's when SoundHound broke below that. So I think early on in the week, SoundHound really needs to fight and get back above that 100-day moving average at the very bare minimum. And then it can kind of work its way up to kind of the 50. But you did see as of Friday, the 10 did break below that 50-day moving average. So that usually does signal more of a technical breakdown, of course, but I think over the last couple of trading days, it's really hard to judge because I think all of this was being artificially suppressed. So it is kind of skewing a lot of the technicals. But going into this upcoming week, looking at the market position, you see a good amount of willing buyers up until about that 1370. And conveniently, that's actually what the low was on Friday, so 1371. So all SoundHound needs is a nice gentle push, and then it can get back to, realistically, I would assume that 16 to about 16 to 1697 in theory. But once we do also get a couple new analyst ratings, the market really does listen to Daniel Ives. So when he says jump, like people say, how high? So if he comes in and gives a very bullish rating on SoundHound, it's going to get on a lot of people's radar. So at the end of the day, anticipate a lot of volatility. Assuming we do get some updates for the shutdown, then I do feel that we will be closing between this pivot and this S1. So between that $18.50 and $16 range. So let me know your thoughts on that. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. I always greatly appreciate that. And then one final thing, I just launched a new, it's equivalent to Patreon, but for those of you that were wanting to kind of join, I did make a tier just for swing trades. And I just launched this roughly around like 2 days ago, give or take. Haven't really advertised it all that much, but if you are interested, I put it at $10 a month. So swing trades, I'm going to put out at least 2 or 3 every single week. And lately they have been bangers. So even the market, the last couple of trading days have, like, it was horrible. A lot of my swing trades went up because I started to kind of put out kind of unknown names, and I think generally they were good value plays. They did move higher. So really worthwhile to kind of check that out. So link to that is in the description below and also the comments. But with all that said, hopefully everyone has an amazing weekend thus far. And with that, appreciate all of you watching.